You're listening to the Easy Feed podcast, episode number 95. 5 important nutrients to focus on in kids.
Hi there, I'm Karina Savage, and with over 20 years' experience feeding children, including my own, I've learnt all the secrets that busy mums need to get their children eating better and actually enjoying healthy foods. So a huge welcome to the Easy Feed podcast.
Welcome back. I hope you're really well. Today I want to talk about nutrients. I've been doing a deep dive into nutrients lately, and by that I mean vitamins and minerals, all different types of vitamins and minerals, also fiber, all sorts of things. So I wanted to just give you a little summary, a little 101 today on some vitamins and minerals to focus on in our pediatric population, in our kids. And there's certainly good evidence and statistics, data, whatever you want to call it, in relation to some key nutrients that are at risk in our kids these days in Australia. There's been a really good study that's come out called the Origin study, which looked at iron specifically, but there's other really good statistics data that comes out from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, there's OzFit studies. So there's a lot of good data which helps us understand what's going on with our children's intakes these days. And it really, I think, has changed over the years as we move to a lot more fast foods, convenience foods. We're not coming home to have lunch at home in the lunch break. Our lunches are very different, and I know I've talked about this on other podcast episodes, but it is certainly very different, I believe, these days. Look, I know that you're gonna say, "Well, I had a ham sandwich at school, and that's what my kid had." So, for some families, it's the same, but I know my mum used to go home to my nonna's house and have a home cooked lunch every day from school. I know that that's different to my lunchbox as I was growing up, and I know that's different to my kids' lunchbox as they're growing up. And so things do change and not always for the better. So I just wanted to talk about some nutrients that may have always been at risk in our population, but I think are certainly emerging to be, important considerations because some deficiencies are increasing, other deficiencies are decreasing, which is great. So, for example, iodine deficiency, whilst it's still something that we need to be mindful of, is reducing now that we're using iodized salt in all the bread and, this food fortification. And that's really the role of food fortification. It's the government identifying population deficiency risk and then going, right, let's put it into our food. And that is why there is mandatory fortification of all regular wheat products in Australia and New Zealand. It falls under the same food standards law. All of our wheat that is used to make anything like bread or pasta in Australia has to be fortified with folate and thiamine and iodine. Thiamine is vitamin B1. And that's because they identified that people weren't getting enough in their life, in their diet. So I hate that word, but you know what I mean. And so they fortified wheat with that, and that significantly reduced the deficiency, which is great. But now we're seeing other deficiencies. And so it's really important to be mindful as parents of the key nutrients possibly at risk for your little ones. So you've got that information and you can then tailor what they eat a little more to make sure that they're not at risk of those deficiencies, or give them a supplement because look, these days supplements can be beneficial for certain nutrients for certain children. And look, I see a lot of children that eat pretty much white beige foods, and those children do need supplements, especially in the short term, just to plug nutrient gaps. Whilst we set up a long term plan that really is ideally to expand their variety and get them eating whole food, but it's not always possible in the short term, especially neurodivergent children. And so we do lean on supplements, and that is okay in the short term so that our children get what they need for their body and their brains to thrive. So let's dive into the first nutrient. And look, this possibly doesn't come as a surprise to you because iron is a really important nutrient. It's important for brain development. It builds myelin. It helps make dopamine, neurotransmitters in the brain. It's really important for energy levels. It's important for our red blood cells. It's important for attention, mood, sleep, learning. So it's very important that our children are getting enough iron. And we know that a lot of children are not getting enough iron. And so it's something that I believe is evolving as a deficiency that we really need to be paying attention to. The most recent data that's come out of the Western Australian study, the Origin study, shows that about 57%, so almost two-thirds of 3-year-olds, had low iron levels below the threshold. And so this is pretty alarming when we're looking at two-thirds of 3-year-olds have low iron, which could then impact their development, their behavior, their brain development. And look, it's happening for a number of reasons, but predominantly in my view as a pediatric dietitian of 25 years, it's that they are number one, restricted with their intake. And number two, it's predominantly white and has a lot of dairy in it. And dairy displaces the healthier foods that have iron and fiber. So, for example, they'll have yogurt, they'll have cheese instead of edamame or peanut butter or grainy bread or something that has iron and fiber in it. Now, we're talking about iron in number one, so we'll focus on iron and not fiber, but dairy displaces it. And dairy is so filling and satisfying that once a child has a cup of milk or a tub of yogurt or cheese and crackers, that they're not going to want to go and have another, bowl of edamame or something that does contain iron. So dairy is a big factor, I believe, in why a lot of our children are iron deficient. I also believe that gut microbiome influences absorption of nutrients. So if you don't have a fully functioning, a very well functioning gut microbiome, and there may be an imbalance of good bugs and bad bugs in your gut, the absorption of nutrients isn't going to be the same. And that can impact iron absorption as well. Can impact iron absorption, especially in little ones that have been on reflux or are on reflux medication. That can impact it. So there's many factors that will impact iron levels, but we are seeing a lot of iron deficiency. And it's definitely something to be mindful of in your little one as well. So looking out for pale skin, tiredness, irritable, poor appetite, because iron deficiency can cause poor appetite, always getting sick, or even gravitating towards metals. So I've certainly had children who lick the metal railings when they go out, or they might eat dirt. So that's a condition called picker, where you're actually seeking out that mineral, not through food. Dirt is not food. Well, it could be food for some people, but you actually, they're seeking it out, and licking metal railing is certainly something that I've seen in a child who has been deficient. So iron studies aren't always routine. I'm not going to say every child needs to go and get a blood test, but at the same time, if you are concerned and you feel like your child has symptoms of iron deficiency, then certainly ask your GP to get a blood test. Okay, let's move on to another nutrient, which is vitamin D. Vitamin D is really important. It's as important as calcium for bone health. Okay. So it helps the bones to strengthen. You need calcium, you need vitamin D. And peak bone mass is laid down in childhood. And this window doesn't reopen. So from the early 20s, the bone density, your bone density, your child's bone density is set for life. And then from that point, you basically lose it over your years. So it's really important that children are getting enough calcium and vitamin D to support bone health. And often they are getting a lot of dairy, so calcium's not as much of an issue. But vitamin D is something that we need to be mindful of, especially in children who have darker skin, children who have a family history of low vitamin D, or children who spend a lot of time inside, maybe gaming, and don't see as much sun, because most of our vitamin D comes from sunlight exposure and conversion that way. But some children are at risk of low vitamin D, and low vitamin D can impact the immune system as well. So, not only bone health, but the immune system. And it's something we need to be mindful of, because we are seeing a lot more vitamin D deficiency. We know that 1 in 5 Australian adults is low in vitamin D. We know that people living in the southern parts of Australia are at more at risk of vitamin D deficiency. So we see up to 45% in the southern parts of Australia over winter time. adults that are vitamin D deficient. And so the further away you are from the equator, the higher risk of vitamin D deficiency because you're just getting less radiation basically, which can be a good thing from some perspectives, but in terms of vitamin D, you're more at risk of deficiency. So just something to be mindful of. Look, in babies, I believe in Australia there should be mandatory supplementation of all babies 0 to 12 months with vitamin D. It's happening in some parts of the world. Definitely, there is mandatory fortification in some big countries. Europe, the US, a lot of those do have recommendations for vitamin D supplementation. I'm not sure if it's a blanket complete country or whether it's a state thing, but definitely there is a lot of support for vitamin D supplementation in babies just because babies are at risk of lower vitamin D, and those who are lower in vitamin D are more prone to have allergies. When they've looked at that in the studies, they found that babies with allergies often will have lower vitamin D. So, something to be mindful of in babies and children. Moving on to zinc. Zinc is another one that we are seeing. Look, it's a bit harder to test for, and it's a little bit more dubious in terms of the results. They can fluctuate. Test for zinc, especially on a blood test, but zinc is really important for the immune system. It's very important, and it's something that can often be missed because it's just not really thought about as much, I don't think. Iron deficiency is easier to test for and is more black and white with the blood results. I think zinc is a little bit more tricky and not everyone will test for zinc. So zinc deficiency can definitely impact your appetite or a child's appetite as well. And so sometimes children will be fussy because of the deficiency and then it just exacerbates the fussiness. And so it's this vicious cycle. So zinc is something to be really mindful of. When they've studied children, they found that 20% of young, like toddlers, don't get enough zinc. So it's something just to be really mindful of. And zinc is found in often the same foods that iron is found in. And so it's kind of a double whammy. So if they're not eating a lot of those protein foods because they struggle with the texture of meat as little ones, then often they are lower in iron and zinc, which can both impact appetite, which can then cause fussy eating. So it's a bit of a cycle there. Just being mindful of zinc as the third nutrient. Okay, number 4 we're going to be talking about today is fiber. Now, fiber is classified as a nutrient, and fiber is so important because it feeds our gut microbiome. It feeds the bacteria in our gut and it keeps our bacteria healthy. So it feeds the good bugs and helps to manage the bad bugs. So basically, the more fiber feeds the good bugs, the more the good bugs populate and are in healthy communities. It means they are able to keep the bad bugs at bay. So they help fight off sickness. They help block sites on the cell surface where the bugs could actually get through into our system, but the probiotics just actually sit there, the microbes sit there and fight off the bugs. So it's actually incredible the immune defense and the soldiers and the warriors that are fighting for us in our gut every single day. And our microbes play a huge role in that. It's, something that's going on without you even realizing. And the way that we can keep those soldiers strong in our gut is fiber. We need our children to be eating good amounts of fiber so that they're feeding the soldiers in their gut to keep their guts strong. Okay. Their gut and immune system really strong and healthy because 3/4 of the immune system is in their gut. And so that's why I always go on about fiber because fiber, 40% of kids don't meet their daily fiber needs. And that's going to directly impact their immune system. And then what happens is if there's not enough good bugs in the gut, then what happens is you get an imbalance of good bugs and bad bugs, and you can start to get more leaky gut. And then you have more sickness and more infection. And then it's just, again, a vicious cycle. And so constipation can also play into it as well. And the constipated kids don't get enough fiber, they get constipated, and then constipated kids can feel fuller. And so then they don't want to eat. So then there's another cause of fussy eating. And often these junky foods that are lower in fiber, they displace these healthier foods that are higher in fiber. So think Jumpies, Oreos, McDonald's fries, all of those junk foods, they displace the healthier foods, which then reduces our children's fiber intake. So fiber is something that we really need to be mindful of because It's going to support our children's gut health, which then supports their systemic health, their brain health. If your gut health is good, your brain health, you have less anxiety, you have less depression, you have less risk of developing allergies, you have less risk of developing obesity and heart disease and high cholesterol later on in life. It's incredible. The link is massive. So, fiber feeds the gut health. So, if we can do that for our kids and support their immune health, amazing. And not only immune health, their general health and the risk of them developing problems later on in life. So, fiber is my number 4 nutrient for that reason. Okay, moving on to number 5, we have omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, so by this I mean DHA and EPA. So they've got long fancy names, but let's just keep it short, DHA and EPA. Now, these omega-3 fatty acids are really important for our cell membranes. They're really important for our brain health. And often our children aren't getting enough omega-3 fatty acids in their life, in their diet. You know, that word that I don't like, but they're not getting enough because maybe they're not getting enough fish. So some kids eat good amounts of fish, whether it's salmon or tuna or whiting, but not everybody, not all kids. And so sometimes we need to think outside the square, especially with vegetarian diets. We need to look at how we can get enough DHA and EPA or omegas into their life. And I talk a lot about this inside my membership with parents to support their children's omega-3 intake because it's really important that they are getting enough for their bodies and for their brains. The healthy fats that I'm always encouraging are fats like extra virgin olive oil, really, really important. Hemp seeds, flax seeds, they're fantastic to use in cooking all of the time. So, omega 3s is something to be really mindful of, especially in babies and young children, because they really need more at that point for their brain development. So, something to be really mindful. Look, it's naturally in breast milk, but as they wean off breastfeeding, it's important that it's coming in through the diet as well. Okay, a few other special mentions before we wrap it up today. I just wanted to mention a nutrient called choline. Now, choline probably hasn't, been talked about as much as other nutrients by me or by other people because it's possibly less well known. But choline is really important for brain development as well. It helps with memory, it helps with attention, and it's really important in young children in brain development. And so it's something that they've identified that children don't necessarily get enough of, and it's something that you might hear more about in the future. But choline is a nutrient that is rich in some foods such as eggs. An egg a day gives you pretty much all of the choline that you need. But choline is not always adequate in children, especially in fussy eaters. And so that's something to just be mindful of. Okay. So choline. And sometimes you'll see choline in supplements. They're the ones that really know, what they're doing because they've identified that choline is as an important nutrient. I don't know if it's actually permitted in some food supplements. So that could be a reason why you might not find it in some foods. But certainly a nutrient that we just need to be mindful of is choline. So if your child is really super fussy and you also want to support their brain health, then choline is something just to be mindful of. With the other nutrients such as vitamin C and B group vitamins, most of the time those ones are okay. Unless there's children that absolutely eat no fruit or vegetables, that's when I really have to start paying attention to vitamin C. So it's really important that we are mindful of, especially those children that eat no fruit or vegetables. But for the majority, even the fussy eaters, often they do get a bit of vitamin C here and there. And because they're having a lot of crackers and things like that, often their B vitamins are okay. Folate is one that's possibly a bit low because there's not getting enough of the leafy greens. But again, it's in bread products and carbs. And so often those B vitamins are a lot more well covered, you would say. One thing I just do want to say is sodium, salt. We know that kids getting way too much sodium. So just be mindful of salt and always looking at the sodium per 100 grams and trying to find a lower sodium option because it's in the packet foods where our kids get most of their sodium. It's not so much the salt that's added to cooking at home. It's the day-to-day breads and crackers and cheese and all of those foods that are quite high in salt. So just paying attention to salt because that is high. And I know that I'm going over my 5, But those top 5 were more nutrients at risk. I mean, sodium is the other way, just often we get too much of it. And choline, I just wanted to have a special mention because it's something that you may not have heard about before, but is still important for our children. So, yeah, just a special mention for choline there. So, if your child is quite restricted with what they're eating, then look, reach out. I'm always happy to chat. We've got 2 options. We have one on one consultations, or you join my membership. Both are great options to get support from me. But it's really important that if you are worried about nutrients, that you do get on top of it early because it can impact your child if they are deficient for a long period of time. And so, all you need to do is get on top of it early and then they thrive and it really helps them. So it's really good just to do a bit of a scan of your child's day or week. I like to say nutritionally balanced week rather than day, and have a think about those 5 nutrients and whether you think that any of those might be a risk. And I know sometimes that's really hard because that's my job is to look at their diet and assess whether they're at risk or, whether they're adequate. But just have a bit of a think about their day, and if you do have concerns about them, then please reach out to me. I'm always happy to chat, and we can work out a best way to support your child and you. If they're constipated, if they're licking metal, railings, if they have less than 20 foods in their life, if they're restricting more, if they're really irritable, if they're highly anxious, if they're neurodivergent, then all of those are red flags for needing nutrition support. So reach out, as I said. It's always better to try and get it from food itself, but I'm the first to recognize that it's not always possible, especially in young children, especially in neurodivergent children or really restrictive eaters or ARFID, kids with ARFID. So you do need to rely on supplements at times, and that is totally fine. That's not failure. That's just where things are at. And I'd rather have a child who's getting the nutrients they need to thrive to support them through that time and fix up their diet as we go, as we can. So there's no failure in needing supplements. And that's why over 30% of parents will use them as a bit of a stopgap, as a bit of a security blanket. And I understand why. We do need to be mindful of all the additives in supplements. So that's why we spend a lot of time actually on my member call, sometimes looking at all the different supplements and finding the ones. Well, actually, no, I actually do all the research first. We do spend a lot of time talking about it because it's important. Some parents place a lot of importance on finding the supplements that are cleaner because a lot of supplements have additives, colors, preservatives in them. And it's hard to find supplements that are free from all that rubbish. So that's another thing we often talk about. So anyway, reach out to me if you want to chat more. And I hope that's been a helpful little summary of 5 nutrients that I think are important to pay attention to in children. And I wish you a beautiful week. Please leave me a review of this podcast. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye for now.